Hello and welcome to the Lowdown, our monthly webinar which unpacks topics of universal interest to marketers. My name is Charlotte Rogers, Deputy Managing Editor of Marketing Week, and I'll be your host. This month, we're discussing new research from our State of B2B Marketing Survey on the Lead Generation Challenge. With me are three excellent speakers: Barney O'Kelly, Head of Solutions and Product Marketing at Alix Partners; Ifeoma Jibano, CMO of Cassava Technologies. Apologies. Cherry Tien, Head of Marketing at Workspace Group. Anyone who wants to share questions with our speakers, please do so via the questions tab, and we will answer as many as we can throughout the webinar. But yeah, to kick us off, so this is the second year that we've done our State of B2B Marketing research, kind of get into what's happening within B2B. And one of the key topics for us was lead generation. And what we found was that lead generation is a bigger focus for 71% of our sample of 450 B2B marketers. And that's compared to 3 years ago. But over a fifth say that their firm's approach to lead gen isn't fit for purpose. And when we kind of dug into that a bit more in the free text, our sample talk about the system being fundamentally broken, a lack of alignment with metrics on sales, a lack of focus on brand building, a lack of appreciation of the nuance involved. So it seems like there's a fair bit going wrong. Barney, if I could start with you, how do you react to those stats? You know, obviously lead generation is becoming more important, but a large number say it's not fit for purpose.
Well, I can sort of understand it on the one hand, in that it is, a commercially valid metric, right? And that's often what we're craving in marketing. Is we know that we're awash with vanity metrics, and they don't always carry much water with, our colleagues elsewhere in the business. So at least a lead has some commercial viability to it. I remember when we were preparing for this, we went through the comments. I think part of it is if the system's broken, it's kind of our job as marketers to help fix it, not just observe that it's broken. And if there's a lack of brand building activity going on, then it's our responsibility to make the case for that as well. And I think part of it is organizations are still very structured in silos. And sales and marketing, although they exist on a continuum, they are quite siloed from one another and therefore measured and incentivized to do different things. And if I had £1 for every time someone talked about the tension between sales and marketing, I'd have many pounds. I'd still be there, but I'd have many pounds. And as a consequence of that, I think we need to think about our role in a value chain. And obviously then brand building sits at one end of that. And then, lead sits somewhere along in that process that ultimately ends up in a sale. So that's my initial response. And I'm sure we'll go into this in more detail, but that's where my head is at right now.
Yeah. Ify, what do you think? Do you think that, kind of saying, because in our free text, there's a lot of people, it feels quite emotional, people sort of saying, there is this misalignment, I'm misunderstood, there's a lot of pressure on leads, but the way that we gather leads is just doesn't work. Do you think, to Barney's point, that marketers seeing that tension need to kind of sort of grasp the nettle and do something about it themselves?
Yeah, no, I think first and foremost, I 100% agree that the pressure on leads is definitely increasing. When we live in the volatile times that we live in, and there's so much pressure on short-term deliverables, then that metric, which is quite concrete around lead generation, becomes the number one priority in a business. But I 100% agree with Barney that there is a perception challenge that needs to be addressed, which is the broader role of marketing within the ecosystem, which is not just about lead generation, but it's also about demand creation. And, there's been so much written about this. People much more intelligent than I have spoken about the long and the short. And at every stage of a life cycle, or every stage in your career journey, you have to always maintain that balance. But ultimately, beyond the perception issue, there's a culture challenge that we need to grab onto. And at the heart of that culture challenge is that the role of marketeers is also about educating and galvanizing the organization around what exactly the role of marketing is, can be, should be today, tomorrow, and hopefully for the longer term. So we typically don't grab that challenge internally and play that role of educating the rest of the organization. And it's something that I think, I would love us to spend a bit more time on, because as marketeers, that responsibility to do that job internally of educating addressing the perception challenge, doing the balancing job, as I said, is so critical and so important.
Oh yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, Cherry, do you say, to Iffy's point around, we've got the numbers there that show that lead gen is becoming a bigger focus than even 3 years ago, and a lot of the sense we get from the research is a lot of marketers are going quarter to quarter. It's that short-term pressure. Any kind of intention on brand building is just kind of being pushed to the side. It's just like, how can we deliver numbers? How can we deliver pipeline? Is that something you've seen from your wider peers? And it's something, that we're seeing in the numbers?
Absolutely. I think when the economy gets shaky, like what we're all seeing, I think the board are always looking for certainty. And I think a higher volume of leads would look like certainty to them, because it creates this dangerous illusion that the market demand is still there and we have this big fat sales pipeline to work with. And somehow it makes think that marketing is doing its job in creating demand. But I think what we just need to be mindful of is that if we only focus on quantity, not quality, what is going to end up causing in the sales team, which I have seen in my current business, is that it's going to create this distraction and noise, especially when the resource in your sales team is limited, because they will end up wasting their time chasing a large number of leads that are unlikely to convert, rather than focusing their effort on converting the good quality leads and ultimately closing sales. So I think that can create a really dangerous and vicious circle in the business. And I think just build on to the brand building point, absolutely agree. I think a lot of education is needed in the business. I think unfortunately there is a lot of misperception on what brand building actually is in the business, because a lot of businesses still think brand building is completely separate from lead generation. But in reality, brand building creates demand for the brand. It makes the whole marketing funnel works a lot harder and more effectively. It generates more leads for us, but also better quality leads, and ultimately having a bigger impact on our bottom line. And I think as marketeers, that's what we just need to work harder to help the business to understand by showing the commercial value of these activities.
Definitely. And I think to your point, Cherry, and something you were saying, Barney, is the idea that if marketers fall into this trap of lead gen is really important in my business, but it's fundamentally broken, as some would say, and they're not fixing that, and then you're throwing these leads over to sales, which is not a great way to be. But then sales are looking at it and it is deteriorating that relationship, because they're saying, well, these leads don't work, or this is poor, and it denigrates the position of marketing, which none of us obviously would want. I mean, Barney, do you think that actually, because you talked there about this, the tension between marketing and sales, and it's kind of ever present, but this is not helping?
No, not at all. And I think part of it is you don't have to go too far to find marketers who complain that their business doesn't understand them. Right. But I would say the challenge in response to that is, do you really understand the business? And that might sound provocative. It's not meant to. But, marketing at its essence, there should be a lot of research in marketing. It's a very hot debate at the moment with the advent of things like synthetic research. And, I don't want to go down that particular rabbit hole at the moment. But actually, your business will have data. Now, depending on your business, it will be of a certain quality and it will have a certain availability to it, and it will be owned by certain people. But actually, if you as a marketer want to understand what a good lead looks like, or what a good sale looks like, or what a good customer looks like, there should be some variety of data that will help you understand that. And Cherry mentioned the funnel, and I was thinking about this as I walked the dog this morning, right? Like, oftentimes we think of these things as being linear processes, and we think of the funnel as starting at the top and then working its way downwards. I would encourage a lot of people, particularly if they're newer to the organization, make friends with sales, and make friends with sales by trying to understand what they're trying to achieve, not lobbing leads over the transom and hoping that they can then sift through it and find the value. What is a good customer for your business, and what characteristics do they have, and work backwards. So almost come back up the funnel again, and then figure out the types of interventions you can be making. And there is a point when marketing's role stops and sales role begins. And I've always been very adamant that you have to manage those handoffs really, really well, because otherwise you just end up with this big gray area where everybody's trying to do some version of each other's job poorly. But I think understanding that could, I'm not saying it will, that could get you back up to getting brand back on the table in a meaningful way, as a way of creating the environment for your organization to be better understood, better known, to help create that space for your salespeople to sell, because they're not having to explain who you are and why you're in the room in the first place. So that's a theory and a thought as much as anything else. But I think it's our job to really get under the skin of the organization and understand that sales process and our role in it, rather than the business to understand how we can be useful to them, even though they don't necessarily always understand what we do day in, day out.
Yeah, that feels like a really proactive approach. And I think one of the things that we've also seen is that maybe because there's a frustration with how lead gen is in businesses, it is shifting and it is evolving. So 2/3 of our samples say tactics for generating leads are changing. A main source of change actually is a greater focus on content. So things like thought leadership on LinkedIn, podcasts, to drive engagement. That was 69% said that. This was followed by a bigger focus on social media. So basically almost half said that they were doing more social. And 45% said they were using employees as influencers, more so, and 44% said developing deeper relationships with key accounts. Ify, what do you make of this sort of focus on content and social? Do you think that's a good way for B2B brands, a good route to go down? And do you think, because I know you have experience in B2C, do you think there's things they can learn from B2C brands?
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting question, and indeed reflects what Barney was saying a bit about, the fact that the funnel is no longer linear. I think, I would go as far to say that in many organizations, the funnel is actually broken in the sense that you have a huge amount of context, what I like to call context collapse, where traditional channels of reaching and targeting your customers are evolving and changing. So in every organization, depending on your customer needs, your customer pain points, the data that you have, where your customer is spending time, you have to deploy evolving tactics to ensure that you are building trust, you're building momentum. So not just, leads are great, but what's happening to that lead? What kind of momentum are you building to ensure that you are driving through to that purchase point? So, the use of thought leadership, the use of PR, the use of social media definitely are increasing in relevance within the technology space because of the importance of dark social influence, and the fact that you have to think about the role that AI is playing and how AI is looking at different contexts, and as a result, how your content needs to be immersive and pervasive across multiple channels that you probably wouldn't ordinarily have thought about. So I think it's all valid, both in the world of B2B as well as the world of B2C, and having that fluidity and thinking through the relevant touch points, how to build trust across all of those touch points to ensure that you are ultimately influencing purchase decisions depending on the buying cycles, whether you're in B2B or in B2C. So yeah, I think it's important to be fact-based, to know your customer, know where your customer is at, and then evaluate the most effective channels and drive the fluidity and the momentum that's required in this world of context collapse that we're living in.
I love that idea, if you have momentum, and that being like, where are you going with this? And it's not just about leads. I mean, Cherry, what do you think in terms of this sort of shift in B2B that we've seen as well towards more content, more social, brands experimenting beyond even LinkedIn, channels on TikTok, for example, things like that? From your experience in B2C, but also like, what do you think? Do you think this is a good route to go down as long as it's done in the right way?
For me, yes, I think, because I've had the experience of working B2C and B2B as well, and I honestly don't think there's that much difference between the two worlds. Yes, it's more complex within B2B with customer journeys, buying journeys, and decision-making processes, but ultimately you are talking to and marketing to human beings. So I think it's the same human to human marketing in the world of B2B, but perhaps with higher stakes and a more complex buying journey. And definitely, I think in my world, which is very much SME focused, our marketing channels and tactics are probably more similar to B2C rather than the traditional B2B, because we're talking to really small businesses with 1 to 2 people to up to about 10, 15 people. So you have to engage with them on an individual, on a personal level, on a human level. So for us, for example, social media content have always played a key role in our lead generation and worked really effectively for us. And I'm not just talking about LinkedIn, I'm talking about TikTok and Instagram, because that's where our audiences are. That's where they're consuming content as human beings, not just as business people. So that's where we need to be to engage with them as well. And what we also found worked really well for us is this emotional storytelling, which is quite typical in the world of B2C. Because again, in our industry, finding a home for your business is a hugely emotional journey for small businesses, for their owners and founders. So what we found was that the emotional factors often help to seal the deal for them. So as a brand, why wouldn't you try to build an emotional connection with your audience? And which is why I think, unlike most of our competition, whose social media content is filled with product imagery, photos, beautiful offices, we're actually telling customer stories and how different customers from different sectors and backgrounds are making it happen and workspace. And that's really resonated with our audience. And when we target different customer segments and different sectors, we try to make those stories as relevant and relatable to them as possible to this audience. So I think that has definitely been a big win for us. And we're trying to do the same to showcase our customers, to tell our customer stories with our events, and also within the podcast series we've just launched, to try to use our customers to attract a like-minded audience to our brand and to our space. And I think that's something we'll definitely continue to do. And another channel I think we've discovered, which worked really well for us this year, is actually connected TV. Again, a typical B2C channel, and another emotional storytelling channel. And what we found with connected TV was that even though it didn't generate a huge amount of leads and inquiries to us, not much more, but it has really improved the quality of our leads, because people are coming to us with a higher purchase intention. They're warmed up to our brand, they understand us better, so they're more likely to convert and therefore more likely to translate into sales and revenue. So again, that emotional engagement beforehand really helped. So I definitely think there's a lot more we can do in the world of B2B to learn from B2C on kind of the emotional rigor, the creative flair, the human-to-human tactics to build that human relationship rather than just treating our audience as faceless organizations.
I couldn't agree more. And I just wanted to ask Cherry on the connected TV point, so interesting. Did you, when you were going into a channel like that, which might have been new for the business, but in terms of how did you explain to the wider organization that it is a different kind of lead? Like, to your point around the people who are being driven from there have that higher purchase intent. So it's not about volume, it's about quality. It's something we're going to discuss later in the webinar. But did you have to kind of talk to the organization about, look, we're going to make this investment in connected TV, but we're looking to drive leads in a different way?
I think firstly, we've done social content for a long time. We know that works, and we know that emotional storytelling works really well for our audience. And at the time, we were looking to scale that and help us to reach more audience with storytelling. And we have seen some diminishing returns with our social media channels because we've done it for so long, we've spent a lot of money on it. So in our media planning process with the agency, we found that connected TV is actually a really good channel to help us scale that piece, because it's AV is one of the best storytelling channels, and it can help us to reach our audience in an incremental way. So I think that's how we've convinced the business to give it a go. But obviously it's not easy. We had to do kind of a TV pilot test So we made a TV ad, tested that for 12 weeks, and we've put together a really comprehensive measurement framework to help prove kind of the commercial results of the TV pilot. So I think what was really interesting from what we've seen was that even though we didn't see lots more inquiries and leads, what we have seen is that our viewing numbers has really gone up from the pre-campaign level, but also from the same period compared to the last 3 years. It's actually gone up by almost 25% compared to the last 3 years average, even though we're in a slower market today. So that just showing the quality of the leads coming through. And that also translated into sales in the following few months to help us hit our commercial targets. So that has really given us a really kind of confident picture to show the business the value in the quality of our leads. Wow. And at the same time, we have built econometrics, which again helps to estimate ROIs of these channels and help us to provide a clearer picture to the board on how these activities are linked to our commercial targets this quarter, this year, but also in the next 2 or 3 years to help us align better with the business.
So interesting. So interesting to how you've made that work. Barney, where do you stand on this and the idea of the emotional storytelling, using channels like social more, investing in content? Do you think this is a good play for B2B brands?
On the whole, yes, but there are factors to it. I'm actually really interested in that connected TV thing because I think the leads have to work harder to get to your business than they necessarily do with social and online stuff. And I think a lot of the time we've traded convenience for conversion, right? So this is probably perpetuating the poorer quality leads that are coming through because it's easy. It's a couple of clicks. It's a touch of a screen or a click of a mouse kind of thing. I mean, yes, storytelling, yes. I struggle with the term because I think it's become devalued over time and everybody's trying to sell storytelling. But I work in professional services, which is a long and storied track record of talking about how many offices a business has and how smart everybody is, which is a very rational proposition, but very indistinct. I think the value really is in the stories. You know, you go anywhere and find really good salespeople. There's a story, true or otherwise, about somebody just like you who was in here yesterday buying exactly the thing that they want to sell you because aren't you exactly the same as that person? So I think there's a lot to be said for it. I think people typically respond well to stories. It is, you know, the oldest medium for the transmission of information that we have as a species, and that shouldn't be avoided. I think that emotional resonance matters even when you're doing something that face value seems a bit dull. And B2B has for a long time and rather lazily been called boring. I think it's not. We've just made it that way through some of the things that we do. And I think the types of content we often produce, we confuse quality with effectiveness as well. And I think in professional services, we can be a bit too po-faced. And as a consequence, we sacrifice put IQ points out on the page. So I think they're really, really critical things. I was fascinated by what Cherry was saying about her strategy and what a big deal finding your first office is for a business of a certain size. I think really getting under the skin of the emotional drivers of your customers and clients is really, really critical. And once you do that, and that's something that marketers are uniquely skilled at doing. Often we are like the emotional cortex of the business, right? We should be the people that talk about feelings, right? Because no one else is doing it. Your finance function isn't turning up talking about feelings. Your sales function often aren't either. But they matter, and they matter to every business. And if we can find a way to connect with them and tell stories that resonate and create that connection, and that then translates into an invested lead who feels a connection, feels you can help them. Like, I'm using these words very deliberately. This is our job because no one else is doing this in the organization. And yes, we get dismissed as fluffy and all of that kind of stuff. That's sod off, right? It's not. It's really important stuff. The emotional aspect of how you create a connection with your business and sell something that's often very expensive to a lot of people who have institutional and personal motivations is absolutely critical. So whilst I'm sad that the word storytelling has been appropriated and productized, the concept is extremely powerful and shouldn't be overlooked by anybody.
Definitely. Well,
Yeah, I would just love to build on that, because it's such a critical point. And I would like to pivot the storytelling concept to value creation. Ultimately, we have to ensure that we are delivering value, communicating value, and telling stories of value. Either you capture the value internally or you're communicating the value externally to your customer. And that is the core of storytelling, and how you translate. So in the technology business where I'm at, it's evolved from this, we'll build it and they'll come, to the need to translate the technicality of a product into the customer value proposition. And that is the core of storytelling, because ultimately, yes, you can talk about the product features. Yes, you can talk about how amazing, this cloud and cybersecurity feature is. But if you're not speaking in a way that connects with your customer and unlocking value creation, then ultimately you're not really doing a job that's connecting with anyone, apart from just adding noise to the plethora of noise that we are exposed to on a daily basis. So the storytelling has to be of a certain flavor that ensures that you effectively connect, and you're connecting to a need of your customer that ultimately creates value for your business internally and externally for your key customers.
Absolutely. And I think actually that plays into a question we've had. So we've got a question from Nikita that says, what does a good and tasteful emotional journey / content, what does that look like in B2B? So, I mean, yeah, if you want to continue, I mean, what do you think? It's interesting that Nikita uses words like a kind of tasteful emotional journey. So one that's relevant, still stays true to the
differentiated, has category relevance. So I think it starts with your insights. We've spoken about this a lot. I think it's so important to ensure that you have the right data. When I joined this organization, I ensured that we had a research stack that enabled us to have quantifiable data from customers that you can base your storytelling on. So you start with data, you start with insights, and then you have to translate that data and your proposition into, like I spoke about already, a value proposition that effectively communicates what you represent, what is relevant to the customer in a differentiated way that plays into memory structures. So relevance, differentiation, memory structures. You can use humor sometimes, depending on your customer base and what motivations they have. But at its core, for me, differentiation as well as memorability are two key components that can enable you to tell that tasteful journey consistently as well over time. Can enable you to cut through the noise, the vanilla, but it has to start from data, it has to start from insights, and it has to be tailored in such a way that drives that cut through in a way that effectively influences your customers at the end of the day.
Definitely. We've got another question. Solid panel. Thank you. Thank you very much. They say, how do you go about identifying which channels to utilize, and how do you find where your audience are? Do you adopt a cast your net wide approach or drip feed content across a select number of channels, especially when you get pressure from leadership on ROI? That's from Sheena. Cherry, how would you answer that? Like, how do you kind of identify the channels that are best for you? And then is it about casting a wide net, or is it about drip feeding content?
I think it's probably a combination of both. I think firstly, it's about deeply understanding your customers, who they are and where they are, and really, so we work really closely with our media agency to use a number of media planning tools from them to look at where our audiences are in different channels. And that starts with really knowing who our audiences are in terms of kind of the demographics, where they live, kind of their age, gender, etc., and use media planning tools to give us a good picture of the key channels that we need to be using. And then secondly, it's a case of test and learn. So for the channels we're really less confident about, then we spend a small amount of money in our channel first and have a really rigorous and kind of comprehensive measurement framework, put that in place to measure the results and have a more phased approach to look at whether it's actually working for us or not. So a combination of both.
Interesting. We've got other questions coming in, but I think that this next topic will probably spark a lot of debate as well. So our research also looked into pressure, and I think that's something actually that Sheena touched on in her question around ROI. Almost 2/5 of marketers that we spoke to said that their department is under pressure to deliver marketing qualified leads regardless of quality. Marketers are clearly under pressure to hit volume goals. But surely this only harms commercial performance and the standing of marketing in an organization. Like, how can you be taken seriously if it's just about volume, it's not about quality? Barney, how do you convince a business that it's not about volume, it's about value? How do you, how do you kind of get over that mentality?
I alluded to this earlier. I mean, I think one approach I've tended to find quite helpful is once you've established that understanding of the business, and there is a hastiness in the world of work at the moment. Like we don't have time and all these kinds of things, and it is difficult, and we're under pressure. Like from day one, deliver, and you kind of have to find a way of operating at two speeds a little bit. But where you can, getting under the skin of the organization should help you develop hypotheses, right, around how the complete marketing toolkit can help that organization. And I often find starting a conversation with a hypothesis is what then provokes a reaction. And I don't care if that reaction is positive or negative. I've got a reaction, and then you can have a conversation on the back of it. But I think turning up and asking people what you need to do to deliver value, to Iffy's point, is not a great place to start. It's not a strong place to start. It's quite a passive position to take. So I think part of that is understanding the organization, understanding the data points that matter to the organization. And you and I talked about this the other day, Charlotte. In marketing, we talk more about data now than I can recall in 20 plus years of being in this. And I don't think our profession is in any greater standing as a consequence of that, because we're turning up with crap data. We're turning up with the data we can get, not the data the business understands and the business needs. So we need to figure out what are those data points that stimulate the business, and appreciate that people don't really understand what we do, but it's our job to show them. So I think having that understanding of what good looks like internally, bringing some sense of where the potential customers who look a bit like the people you're already selling to are elsewhere, marrying those two things together and presenting that as a hypothesis and looks across the value chain of marketing. So you're not just saying it's about leads, it's a yes and in the spirit of improvisation, right? Because oftentimes the conversation becomes you're wrong, no, you're wrong, rather than we can both be right here if we expand our conversation. And I think a lot of it really comes down to building those relationships in the first instance and recognizing that you have to earn your place at the table. You won't be given your place at the table. And once you get old enough and grouchy enough, like I am, you demand your place at the table and everyone just gets annoyed at you. But it's different, right? And I think building that credibility, which will come by building those relationships, which will be based on trying to build a very strong understanding of your organization, the motivations of the people. Market yourself internally. I mean, again, Charlotte, you and I talked about this the other day. Marketers are terrible at marketing themselves. They're terrible at marketing the profession. And as a consequence, I think we need to think about how we use the influence we have, the tools we have, the unique abilities that we have to be of value in a broader strategy for the organization. There's a bit of a woolly answer because it's not an easy question, but you really kind of got to back yourself and stick to it. And you can't say, no, you don't want leads, but you want leads and this is what a lead looks like from all the way over here before you even knew it was a lead to all the way over here when it ends up in Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever your organization is using poorly?
I think that was an excellent answer, and I think you make such a good point around backing yourself. And I think this idea that the marketers feel so under the cosh that they're actually under pressure to just deliver a lead that everyone kind of knows, like may not have any quality to it, and still there's the pressure there. And I've talked to marketers in the past on this topic around patience and the idea that when you say to a business, no, it's not about pipeline. The pipeline will go down if we focus on quality over quantity, but it will pay off. There's the illusion, and I think this word's already been used today, the illusion of pipeline, and numbers equals growth, and it's not like that. It's self-defeating. But this idea that sometimes there's this panic in an organization when the pipeline goes down if you focus on quality, and sometimes they need to be patient. If you do think that's important, that it's that whole long-term piece that we've spoken about, this idea of it is not getting the business to buy into this agenda of kind of thinking longer term.
Yeah, absolutely. I think patience and resilience, and a bit of thick skin is so important to survive in today's world. The pressure is real, and quality and quantity at the right point in time are equally important. And I think it's so critical to always keep that long-term view, to look back. We go through different cycles, and I've been in marketing now for close to 30 years, and we've had similar kinds of volatility. We've had similar kinds of evolving nature of marketing, the age of digital and traditional marketing, and no doubt we are going into a very new chapter in the world of AI and the world of automation, the world of effectiveness, and the world of speed. But it's quite important to take stock of the journey that we are on, and what has worked well in the past and what can work well today. So being conscious of managing this balance of quality over quantity is so important. It will come a time where quantity becomes another vanity metric, and we would have to ensure that the quantity is driving the right output. So in as much as there is a need to deliver on that quantity in the short term, we also need to do our job, which is both the combination of the short-term performance metrics as well as that longer-term value creation, demand generation, category relevance, and just driving through that longer term value that we've all spoken about in this call. So for me, yes, patience, resilience, thick skin is important, but also co-creating with sales. And I think we will probably move into a world very soon where marketing and sales have to just become more of a unified framework. It's working in silos from just a marketing perspective. We've seen it happen with marketing and communications. You've seen that integrated development in terms of how you have to ensure that internal communications, corporate communications, as well as marketing are working hand in hand. That commercial function where you're working and co-creating with sales, you're giving them that hypothesis, as Barney said, you're demonstrating the case studies of what has worked well in the past, and you're delivering in the short term as well as co-creating for the future is extremely important. So it sounds like a lot, and it is, and it's intense, and it's not an easy job to do, but I think it's important to have the patience and the resilience to be able to operate effectively.
I absolutely agree, and I just want to build on to as well. I think to help prove the value of quality, I think data can play a really important role as well. I think for us as a business for a long time, we're also just focusing on the quantity of our leads. But when we did a piece of data analysis, what we found was that there wasn't really a linear relationship between the quantity of leads we're generating and the sales and revenue we're generating, because during the month where we had a really huge surge in the quantity of leads, we didn't necessarily see it was followed by increased sales and revenue. So that really helped us as a business to question whether quantity and chasing quantity purely was the right focus for us. And that, coupled with the data we gained from our connected TV campaign, really showed the business the value of balancing quantity and quality and what that ultimately can do for the business on its commercial goal. So really use your data to tell that story, to convince your business to get that balance right. And collaborating with the sales team is another thing we have done more recently. Again, really helped us because now in our marketing team, we're not just looking at the quantity of our leads, we're also targeted on conversion rate. So the conversion from our leads to viewings and leads to deals. And that means we're working much closer with the sales team to look at where we can generate better leads for them based on our availability, based on the types of customers we need in different areas, and also based on the sales team's feedback on the ground. And that really helped us to align the marketing and sales funnel end to end to kind of deliver against a common commercial goal. So that's been really helpful for us.
I think you're ahead of the curve on that, Cherry. Right? And I think if you mention AI, and we've done reasonably well to get this far without it coming up. But we talked about this. Is marketing and sales are kind of in the same job, right? It just depends on where you are in the process. And these functional silos, with the arrival of AI, if it delivers everything it promises, and personally, I'm not quite there yet. But if we're not careful and don't think about that value chain and that continuum, where AI can help us be more effective and more efficient and more productive, if we don't break those silos, we'll be optimizing in very narrow lanes, and we'll be optimizing what sales are being measured on and what they're trying to achieve, and we'll be optimizing what marketing are trying to achieve. And unless those two things are completely aligned, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And unfortunately, the curse of the marketer is the spoils go to the sale, not to the marketing, right? So as long as sales are hitting their targets, it's very easy for marketing's contribution to that to be forgotten. And this is why attribution matters if you can do it well. I work in professional services. Attribution is almost impossible in professional services. And we also have the double kicker, which is our sales force are all entirely amateur, right? They're all actually technically proficient consultants who have to sell, and those are very different skill sets. So how we then, embark on a joint endeavor with those people is really, really important. But I think if we don't break those silos sooner rather than later and stop squabbling amongst ourselves, then we're just going to make these problems worse, not better. So, Cherry, we're just going to follow you. I think you've nailed it. So
definitely can't say I've nailed it. Work in progress.
Do you know, we've got a question actually from Rena. It says, moving away from leads, such a high percentage of leads are not followed up. We've been chatting about this in marketing for what feels like hundreds of years. How to manage and champion the change to more reputation and brand and less leads that are not followed up? Has anyone managed this? So the idea of championing more reputation and brand, less obsession with leads, and what advice that's Rena's asking, what advice you have?
I'm happy to take a punt on this. And obviously my context is important here. The thing is with following up on a lead, right? In B2B, more broadly, outside of professional services, you kind of have your marketing qualified leads and your sales qualified. Like qualifying a lead is a different thing. It requires almost cold calling somebody, because often what passes for a marketing qualified lead hasn't really created any real insight for the salesperson to act upon. I'm been in the curious position, as I'm sure we all have, of being both a customer and a marketer. And I am a very casual downloader of a white paper. For a long time, in more spoilt times when I had an assistant, her email address was the email address that I used until she told me to stop, because I just wanted the info, not the conversation. But as a consequence of that, oftentimes if then sales are trying to qualify the lead, they're almost like, well, you downloaded our white paper, so clearly you want to buy something. And a lot of the time it's like, no, I didn't. bugger off. I just wanted the white paper. So I think we need to be really mindful of the psychology of what's required to qualify a lead in a meaningful way. So how can we get more insight? Maybe marketing, if we focused on that quality piece a little bit more and the quantity piece a little bit less, could play a better role in nurturing a lead and getting a clearer sense of what they're really interested in. I mean, if we get leads come through our website. We're a professional services firm that helps clients through really, challenging situations, but we still get people come through the website. So the behavior's there, but we just need to find a way to make that qualification process less psychologically difficult and more meaningful. And again, that's a high level answer, but I don't think we fully understand that component in it, and it becomes just passing people through a process on a CRM platform. That's my view.
That's thank you. That's an amazing take. I wanted to return to our stats actually, because I think this harks back to something we started almost at the start of the webinar about relationship building with stakeholders. So we found that over half of our samples say that senior leadership fail to understand the potential of marketing beyond lead gen. And over a fifth say that delivering marketing qualified leads is the only metric of success that they're measured on. And the survey also finds that 2/5 say that senior leadership do not understand the length or complexity of the sales cycle. So you've got marketers that are trapped, that lead gen is the only thing that they're measured, their only metric of success. And this idea that senior leadership don't understand the nuance of the buying committee and all those people you have to convince and the length and complexity of the cycle. It comes back to that education piece, doesn't it, Iffy, in the terms of like how you as a leader lead that conversation, educate people. And I suppose it's an ongoing process, isn't it? It's not a kind of one and done. I suppose the education needs to happen maybe continually. Is that what you think, Iffy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the point that we made quite early on. We're not very good at this as marketeers. And if you ask yourself as a marketer, how much time are you actually spending internally with your peers and your colleagues, actually just educating around the buying cycle, around the short and the long of it, sharing case studies, sharing statistics, looking externally, sharing insights. It's hard work. Huh? The CFO doesn't, have to educate about a P&L. The technology officer is not, well, maybe now they're spending time educating around what AI actually means. But, most other members of the organization, HR, are not, talking about the principles of talent management. They just get on with it. But it is extremely important for marketing to educate around the science of marketing, as well as the art, the power of influence, the power of, content creation, the power of data-driven decision-making that starts from the customer and that enables you to have the kind of impact you have. So it's an ongoing process of trying to take people along internally with you to ensure that you are galvanizing the organization effectively and demonstrating exactly the how of marketing, the what of marketing, the why of marketing. So I think yes, it's definitely back to education. It's not a one-off. You have to do it consistently. You have to identify the key stakeholders internally, both your supporters and your detractors, and you need to ensure that you're giving your role internally enough share of voice consistently throughout the year. Let's take that away. Evaluate your share of voice, the share of voice of marketing internally. To what extent are people walking away thinking that marketing is not just about leads, but it's the science of marketing as a holistic ecosystem that ensures that we co-create with different parts of the organization. You look at insights and data, you ensure that you're generating not just short-term deliverables, but also demand creation. So people actually know what demand creation means. And it's not about being patronizing, but it's actually about embracing the marketing profession as a scientific endeavor, that if you have not gone through that training, either years of experience or classroom learning, most people don't know. So you have to ensure that you get people up to speed in a way that is, your champion of marketing internally, and you're trying to ensure that you are promoting that role internally. It's not an easy job to do, and I'm not saying that it is, but it's one that people should embrace, and should equip themselves with the right tools, the right knowledge, the right case studies to be able to take and do that role effectively.
That's a really interesting.
No, you go. Sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say that was a really interesting point, because what I've found more recently, probably in the last 6 to 12 months in my business, is that it's really important to convince the business of the value of your activity, by linking that to kind of the commercial value it's creating. If we take the brand building piece, the top of the funnel activity as example, what used to work for us, the softer metrics like brand consideration, brand awareness, increased traffic, or even increased share of voice, brand share of voice, I find those metrics are no longer enough on their own to convince the board of the value you're creating, because they want to know exactly what the ROI is. They want to know exactly what kind of deals and revenue you're generating through these activities and these channels. So it's getting harder and harder for us as marketeers. And I think that's why I found things like econometrics, the data modeling tools, they have been really helpful for us in the last 6 months to show the commercial value of our brand building activities, to show the value creation, and to link our channels and activities to the company's bottom line revenue goals. That has really helped us, I think, to show the value of marketing as a function, as a more strategic function, rather than just a tactical function to drive leads.
I have a slightly different take on this, and it's not in disagreement with anything that Cherry or Ify have said. I think you're both right. When you look at people's careers, people can end up in very senior positions in an organization without ever knowingly engaged in what they consider to be marketing, right? Like as you become more senior, you have to understand how the finances of the business operate. You have to understand P&L. You will have had to hire people, and you probably sadly will have had to fire people, and you may have had to reorganize a department. So you will have engaged with most other functions of the business in some meaningful way as a consequence of becoming more senior. But you don't have to have done that with marketing. And how often do we hear people going, well, I don't really understand marketing? That is utter nonsense, right? My general view is a problem with marketing as a discipline is it is across and in absolutely everything that the organization does, right? So if your recruitment process is crap, that is a bad marketing experience for your organization. We don't own that. We have limited influence over that. What we have to understand, and this is getting old school now, right, is how people interact with our business at every touch point available to them is a marketing event for the organization. Moments of truth is what it was called in the old Scandinavian air service case study, right? And I talk about this a lot as a business because professional services businesses are often very experiential. And when our people are in an organization, often helping them navigate trying situations or trying to achieve something really ambitious, how they operate, how they interact with people, how they conduct themselves, they are all hugely influential on whether we'll be invited back ever again, right? So they're all marketing events. And we don't own all of that. But a big part of what we need to do, I think, is explain to everybody that either everything in this organization is marketing or nothing is, right? We will look after the bit that leads to the commercial events of the organization. We'll work with sales. But, the rest of it is all material in whether people want to buy from us or don't want to buy from us. People confuse brand and reputation all the time for reasons that continue to elude me. But if people don't like your organization, there's a very good chance they're not going to buy from your organization. And the reasons they don't like your organization might have nothing to do with your brand positioning, your proposition, your marketing channels, your content, your thought leadership. It could be a range of other factors. So I think this is where I come at it. And it's not to say that marketing is the be all and end all, other than it is, obviously, because that's what we all do for a living. But it's so critical for people to understand that it's about every interaction that people have with the business. We only control part of it, but if we all think about it and all get aligned behind the direction of the business, the strategy of the business, the goals of the business, and appreciate that every interaction that we have with the outside world should be as positive as it possibly can be. I mean, that's getting a little bit up in the, I might get laughed out of your boardroom with that statement, but I genuinely believe it to be true. It's so important. And this is the weird nature of our chosen profession.
We've only got 5 minutes left, which is like devastating to me because we've got so many questions, and I feel like there's so much we could continue to discuss. But maybe we've got time for one question, and this is from Holly. So Holly says, for someone looking for a new role, how would you communicate past successes in brand and relationship building to hiring managers focused on lead gen figures, i.e., where quantity, not quality, is the target? So the idea of when you're trying to present yourself and get a new job, how do you kind of communicate your successes? If you all want to weigh in on this, maybe as our final point, but if I could start with you, what would you say to Holly?
That was a very long question, but I think I get the general gist of it. No, communicating your success in an elevator pitch in terms of how you unlock value creation for organizations, both from a short-term performance metrics perspectives that drives the bottom line, how you use data and insights to ensure that you have a great understanding of your customer needs, that ultimately deliver that commercial impact in terms of revenue, in terms of profits, but ensuring that the job of marketing is, yes, about lead generation, is, yes, about demand creation, is about reputation, but ultimately has to have the right level of commercial impact in the organization that changes and moves the dial positively for your organization commercially and financially. I think in an elevator pitch perspective, but hopefully you'll be given the opportunity to have an interview where you actually talk about what you've done and your experience, and you have some concrete examples of demonstrating how you brought this to life in concrete manners. I think is the only way that you can get a new opportunity.
What would you say, Jerry?
I would 100% agree. I think rather than to demonstrate your success, rather than listing a list of things you've done, really try to quantify the impact you've had on the organization and align that with your business goal and your commercial goal, and show how you're creating value in the business based on the key business objectives.
How about you, Barney? This point around if you're trying to sell yourself an interview and the recruiter is just all about lead gen, it's to Jerry's point, Niffy's point, is it a way about showing what impact you had and how you created value and kind of changing the conversation with them a bit, flipping it?
Oh, recruitment. I mean,
I'm so sorry.
It's a really interesting one, and there's a cynical answer, and then there's probably a more romantic. The cynical answer is do what you have to do to get through the door, and then do the things you're supposed to do once you're there, right? And the problem is an AI. This is where AI is a bad thing. Like recruitment processes, is you don't have to go too far to find just these soul-destroying experiences of AI in AI. It's just dreary. My personal take on this, when I interview people, I interview for two things and two things only, recognizing the whole process is actually completely flawed from beginning to end. Team fit and resourcefulness. Are you going to be somebody that gets along with the people I've already got in the organization who I value and enjoy working with? And if presented with a problem, are you going to be able to figure it out? Right? Because if I was at my most uncharitable, I'm in a good mood today, so I'm not. Talking to a recruiter who's saying, what do you do about lead generation? Candidly, a lot of them don't really know whether your answer is a good one or a bad one. Right. So I would focus on those things that I think marketers are particularly skilled at, is building that rapport with that person that gives you the permission to talk passionately and with belief about how all of the things that you are capable of doing will result in leads, not I'm really good at getting leads. Right. And consequently, if people buy what you're then selling in that conversation, you will probably end up in a job that fits and that suits you and that works for you. If you are just doing what's required here, you'll probably end up responding to a Marketing Week survey saying your job's all about lead generation because that's what you've been recruited for So that's what you're doing, right? So it's again, it's difficult, and it's one I think that comes with experience and confidence. But if our profession doesn't rediscover its confidence and own what it's all about, then this isn't going to get any better. It's only going to get worse. And it's on us to do that. And we should all help each other with that.
Oh, I've loved this. This has been amazing. I feel like we could go on for another hour. But sadly, because we have loads of questions, but sorry, everybody. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. That is all we've got time for. I just want to say thanks for everyone who joined us this morning and sent in their questions and comments. A massive thank you to Ify, Barney and Cherry for sharing their expertise and wisdom. You'll find ongoing coverage of State of B2B, our marketing research, on Marketing website. And I just want to say thank you again for joining us. And until the next time on the Lowdown, it's goodbye from all of us. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Bye.